The day I got the keys to my first home, the world felt like it clicked into place with a satisfying metallic sound. The realtor shook my hand, the door swung open on smooth hinges. The echo of my footsteps in empty rooms sounded like permission. There was sunlight on the hardwood, thin gold stripes through new blinds, and an almost ridiculous citrus clean smell from the contractors who'd just finished the punch list. I walked from room to room like a kid in a museum, careful not to touch the freshly painted walls, even though they were now finally mine. My name is Ryan Carter, and that house, 2 bedrooms, a small office, a backyard with brave little patches of grass, wasn't just property. It was a boundary I could hold in my hand. After years of roommates and subleases in one place with a landlord who collected rent in cash and promises I had a deed with my name on it. A mortgage to curse, sure, but also a front door that closed on my terms. I kept the keys on their own ring and spun them like a coin between my fingers, as if weight could become confidence. I moved in on a Saturday. It was a procession of cardboard boxes labeled in Sharpie, kitchen, bedroom, office, crossing the threshold like citizens of a new country. My mother texted heart emojis and a photo of the old family couch I had refused to inherit. My best friend sent a link to how to unclog a sink without calling a plumber as a housewarming gift. I ordered greasy pad thai, sat on the floor, and ate it with the sliding door open, listening to the neighborhood breathe. Somewhere a dog barked, somewhere a kid laughed, somewhere a lawnmower droned like a summer afternoon, even though it was early spring. On Monday, I brought donuts to the office because I was in the reckless mood of a man who had just signed away 30 years to a bank, but felt richer than he'd ever been. House donuts, I announced, setting the pink box on the break room counter. The box was a peace offering to everyone who'd once listened to my rent horror stories and offered advice I never took. "Look at Mr. Mortgage," said Priya, leaning in to peer at the glazed crullers. "Are we talking detached yard hardwood? Tell me there's a mysterious attic door. Detached? Yes. Yard? Yes. Hardwood? Yes. No attic door," I said. But the utility closet has a light switch that turns on nothing, and I'm choosing to see that as promise. Laughter, congratulations, the ritual questions and the ritual answers. And then there was Matt. "Congrats, man," he said, taking an apple fritter the size of his palm. "So where is it?" "Close to the office." 15 minutes, I said. "Brookside near the park." "Prime." Matt said appreciatively and took a bite. He had that easy, affable vibe, new fiancé glow hair that fell into a shape you couldn't teach, a voice that made any request sound like a favor you wanted to grant. Must be nice to have space. "It is," I said, feeling the word like a secret. He nodded, chewing. "You know," he said, "this is perfect timing. I've been meaning to talk to you about something." He said it lightly, like we were about to discuss fantasy football or where to order team sweatshirts. He wiped his hands on a napkin and lowered his voice just enough to imply intimacy without excluding the room. "So," he said, "as you know, wedding in 5 weeks." He flashed the ring on his finger like a headline. "Her family's flying in from out of state. Big crew. We were looking at Airbnbs, but everything's either booked or ridiculous. And then I hear you've got this whole house to yourself." The way he trailed off was a magician's flourish. The trick wasn't in what he said, it was in what I was supposed to say next. I smiled politely. "Congrats again. Wedding planning sounds intense." "It is," he laughed, launching into a string of details I did not ask for: dress fittings, venue, parking, the caterer, who ghosted them for a week. Then he circled back to the thing he had placed in the air between us like a test balloon. "Anyway, we thought since we're friends, maybe you'd be cool letting us use your place for the month, just to host my fiancé's relatives. You know how it is with big families." I blinked. In my head, entire sentences assembled and fell apart. A month, my newly bought house, the place I'd measured and planned and promised to myself. The key ring in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. "Use my place," I repeated like the phrase needed translation. "Yeah." He smiled as if it were obvious. "You could crash with a friend, right? Or your mom. It'd be temporary. We'd take good care of it. There are moments when the world tilts and you are the only person who notices. Everyone else keeps sipping coffee and scrolling emails while gravity does something strange in private just to you." I stared at Matt's open, expectant face and heard my own pulse in my ears. He was not joking. This was not a joke. "I just moved in," I said gently, like you'd tell a child that the ice cream shop is closed. need to be there. To, live. He chuckled, totally. But it's just a month, and it would mean the world to us. Her grandparents are old school, being together matters. Hotels feel cold. I thought of my empty living room where the late sun drew warm rectangles on the floor. I thought of the first night when I set a glass of water on the sill and felt irrationally that the house approved. I thought of the boxes still half open the couch I planned to buy, the Saturday I had earmarked for planting herbs I would almost certainly neglect. A month, I said again. Rent-free. The words escaped before I could corral them. He spread his hands. We're tapped from vendor deposits. You get it, but we'll clean it, obviously, and you'd be invited to everything. I could feel the tide of the conversation trying to carry me. It was in the cadence of his sentences, the way he had positioned himself at the center of an imagined agreement. This is how people take things. They sound like they're returning favors. They sound like they're giving you a chance to be generous. I'm happy for you, I said, but I can't give up my house. There was a fraction of a pause. I watched it pass across his face like a shadow from a cloud. Then the smile returned slightly brighter, as if more wattage could bend the answer. Think about it, he said. No pressure. Just friends help each other. I nodded because nodding is the social lubricant that keeps an office from catching fire. He took it as assent, patted my shoulder, and left the break room with the grace of a man who had already placed the furniture in someone else's living room. That afternoon, the first messages arrived. A Slack ping from Kayla in marketing. Matt says you might host his family. That's so generous. A text from Ben Dude Legend. Move if you do it. Weddings are chaos. The passive voice was doing cartwheels. Might. If. The way rumor lays track ahead of the train so it can keep moving. I stood at my desk, staring at the reflected ceiling lights in my monitor, and felt something inside me harden into a line. Not anger yet. Not even indignation. A boundary drawing itself. I had said no. The house was mine. But I understood suddenly how 1,000 tiny hands could try to push that line back an inch at a time and call it compromise. At 5, I drove home in the violet hour, when the taillights look like beads on a string and the radio plays soft songs about decisions. I parked in the driveway and didn't get out right away. The porch light I'd installed the day before glowed a small, steadfast circle. Inside, the rooms were still and waiting. I walked through each one, touching the cool edge of the kitchen counter, the smooth door frame of the office, the sliding glass handle that stuck just slightly, the way all new old houses have their first quirks. I opened the back door and stepped onto the small concrete slab that was almost a patio if you squinted. The grass smelled like it remembered rain. I stood there and realized the house wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a promise I'd made to myself that after years of saying yes to other people's messes, yes to that roommate's loud boyfriend, yes to that landlord's shrug about the leak, yes to the extra weekend hours that became expectation, I would say yes to me. I would say yes to peace. My phone buzzed. A new message from Matt. You're the best. I'll send dates so you can plan around it. He had skipped the question mark entirely, as if punctuation itself had surrendered. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. I'm not able to hand over my home. Congrats again on the wedding. I wish you both the best, but my answer is no. I hit send. The dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then nothing. Inside, I set my keys on the entry table and listened to the soft, confident click they made. The sound of a boundary closing. The sound, if you let it be, of a story beginning. The next morning, I walked into the office expecting at least a little awkwardness. Maybe Matt would be cool but distant. Maybe he'd pretend the conversation never happened. Instead, I found him in the break room holding court like nothing had changed. Morning, Ryan. He called, cheerful as ever. He gestured to a chair across from him, but I just nodded and poured myself some coffee. It wasn't until mid-morning that I realized something had shifted. A few coworkers passed me in the hallway, offering polite but oddly tight smiles. Kayla avoided eye contact entirely. Ben, who usually invited me to lunch without fail, mumbled something about having plans and walked away before I could respond. By the time lunch rolled around, it clicked. The same way news travels fast in an office when someone gets engaged or promoted, it travels just as quickly when someone decides to twist a story. In the cafeteria, I finally caught snippets of conversation that confirmed it. Beko can't believe he's being so selfish. It's just a month and they're friends. Some people forget where they came from once they get a little money. I didn't need to ask who he was. That was Matt's gift, making his version of reality sound like gospel. I'd seen him do it before, getting out of weekend shifts by spinning a sob story about family emergencies that somehow never materialized, or convincing the project manager to let him take the lead on a high-profile account by framing himself as the only one who could handle it. And now it was my turn in his crosshairs. I decided to confront him not in anger, but because I wanted to see his reaction. I found him by the printers, feeding in a stack of papers. "Matt, can we talk for a second?" I asked. He looked up, all affable innocence. "Sure, man." "What's up? I heard people are under the impression that I promised you my house for the month," I said evenly. Just to be clear, I didn't. He tilted his head, smile still in place. "Ah, well, you didn't say yes, but you didn't say no either, at least not right away." "I guess people just assumed." "That's not an assumption," I said, my voice sharpening. "It's misinformation, and it's making me look like a jerk for setting a perfectly reasonable boundary." Matt chuckled like we were having a friendly disagreement over where to order lunch. "Relax, Ryan. No one's going to think less of you if you change your mind. And honestly, it'd mean a lot to me and Sophie. We're under so much pressure right now, this wedding's costing a fortune." There it was, the guilt trip. "Your financial decisions are not my responsibility," I said, quietly leaning in so only he could hear. "And my home is not a wedding venue. Drop it." For a moment his smile faltered. His eyes hardened in a way that told me the charm had an expiration date. But then just as quickly he pasted the smile back on. "All right, man. Your choice," he said, lightly grabbing his papers and walking away. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That afternoon, an email went out to the whole office, looking for temporary housing. Wedding guests need a place to stay. At the bottom, it said, "Special thanks to Ryan for considering helping us out. He's a real team player." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. This wasn't a request anymore. It was a performance. He was painting me into a corner where any refusal looked like a betrayal of the team spirit he'd just publicly assigned to me. That night, sitting in my living room, I thought about all the ways I could respond. I could blast a reply all, setting the record straight. I could escalate to HR. I could even just ghost the entire situation and let the social fallout happen. But I knew Matt. He thrived on public narratives. If I fought him in the open, he'd twist my words again. If I tried to reason with him privately, he'd just find new ways to pressure me. No, this called for something quieter, something he wouldn't see coming. That's when I decided I was going to gather every piece of evidence of his manipulation, not just about me and the house, but about the way he operated, the pattern he'd left behind without realizing it. I started making a list. Times he'd lied to get out of work, instances where he'd taken credit for others' ideas, moments when he'd positioned himself as the victim to gain sympathy. If I could show that this house situation wasn't an isolated event, but part of a bigger pattern, then maybe I could pull the rug out from under him. It wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be loud, but it would be decisive. And this time, when I said no, there wouldn't be a single person left who could call me selfish. If you want, I can continue directly with part 3 and show how Matt escalates his tactics and how Ryan begins to set his quiet trap. That's where the tension will really start to build. Do you want me to go straight into that? The following week, the tension in the office became almost tangible. Matt had turned my refusal into an ongoing spectacle, a slow drip campaign designed to wear me down without ever confronting me outright. It started with subtle digs in meetings. "Some of us are just lucky enough to have extra space," he'd say, with a pointed glance in my direction when the conversation had nothing to do with housing. Or, I guess generosity isn't everyone's strong suit. Each comment was casual enough to be brushed off if I reacted, but calculated enough to leave a bruise on my reputation. By Wednesday, I began noticing people treating me differently, slightly cooler greetings, fewer invitations to group lunches. It wasn't overt hostility, but it was the kind of shift that makes you feel like you're on the outside of an invisible circle. At first, I told myself I could ignore it. This wasn't high school. I didn't need everyone to like me. But I also knew Matt wasn't going to stop until he either got what he wanted or found a new target. And from the smug look on his face every time I didn't react, he clearly believed I would crack first. Then Friday came, and with it, the real escalation. That morning, Sophie, his fiancée, showed up at the office with a box of pastries for everyone. She floated from desk to desk, introducing herself and chatting about the wedding. When she reached mine, she smiled brightly. "Ryan, we haven't met yet. I'm Sophie." I shook her hand, offering a polite smile. Nice to meet you. I just wanted to thank you, she said. Matt told me how you're thinking about letting us stay in your house for the month. It's such a generous thing to do. My family will be so grateful. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just internal office politics anymore. Now he was dragging people from outside work into his narrative. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said carefully. I never agreed to that. Her smile froze, and for a fraction of a second I saw confusion, maybe even embarrassment flash across her face. But then she recovered. Oh, I must have misheard. Well, I'm sure we can sort it out. She moved on to the next desk, leaving me with the unmistakable sense that Matt had just tightened the net. That afternoon, I caught him in the hallway. Why did you tell Sophie I agreed? I demanded. He looked genuinely amused. I didn't. I said you were thinking about it, which you were at least long enough for me to believe you might change your mind. That's manipulation, I said flatly. That's persuasion, he countered, smirking. Don't take it so personally. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. But inside, I was more certain than ever Matt wasn't going to stop unless I made him. That weekend, I started quietly gathering my evidence. I reached out to Sarah in marketing, who'd once complained that Matt had stolen her campaign idea, and presented it as his own. She was still bitter and willing to share the email trail proving it. I called David, a former coworker who'd quit after Matt spread a rumor about him to undercut his credibility. He gave me screenshots of messages Matt had sent to mutual colleagues, and I began keeping a log of every manipulative comment, every public misrepresentation, every little misunderstanding he engineered. By the end of Sunday, I had a folder on my desktop titled Matt Receipts. I wasn't sure yet exactly how I would use it, but I knew this: if Matt wanted to play the long game, I could play it better, and I would make sure that when I made my move, there'd be no coming back for him. Monday morning, I walked into the office and greeted everyone as usual, even Matt. If he noticed the subtle shift in my tone, a calmness that wasn't resignation, but quiet preparation, he didn't show it. He probably thought he was still winning. Good. That was exactly what I wanted him to think. By the time Monday afternoon rolled around, I decided that a head-on confrontation with Matt would be the worst possible move. He thrived on drama, on making the other person look irrational, while he stayed calm and charming. No, I needed something slower, quieter, something that would let him walk straight into his own trap. The first step was simple: plant seeds. At lunch, I sat with a few colleagues I trusted, people who hadn't fully bought into Matt's campaign against me. The conversation drifted to wedding planning, and someone jokingly said, "Ryan, you're lucky you're not in that mess." I laughed. Yeah, especially since apparently I'm supposed to give up my house for a month so someone else can have an easier wedding. The words were light, even self-deprecating, but they landed. I saw the quick exchange of glances. Wait, is that true? One of them asked. I shrugged. Depends on who you ask. That was all I said. No rant, no accusations. Just enough for curiosity to do the rest. By the end of the day, I overheard the same group quietly discussing how absurd it was to expect anyone to hand over their house, especially without paying rent. It was a small ripple, but it was a start. The second step came in the form of strategic absence. Matt was used to me being reactive, answering his digs with sharp comebacks or visible irritation. But now, when he made his little comments, I simply didn't respond. Some people just don't understand community spirit, he said loudly in the break room one morning. I didn't even look up from my coffee. The silence was unnerving for him. Without my reaction, his baiting looked less like banter and more like petty needling. A few people started giving him raised eyebrows instead of laughs. Meanwhile, I was still collecting evidence. Every email, every text, every overheard comment documented with dates and times. I didn't know yet when I'd use it, but the more I had, the better. The real opportunity came unexpectedly. One Thursday afternoon, our department had announced a team values meeting for the following week. It was supposed to be about collaboration and mutual respect, but I immediately saw it for what it was: a perfect stage. If Matt kept pushing, if he tried to make me look bad in front of leadership, I'd have my chance to let the truth come out without ever looking like I'd planned it. In the meantime, I kept tightening the pressure in small ways. When a client sent an email praising my work, I replied and CC'd the whole team, including Matt. When a project required collaboration, I volunteered to work with people Matt had been trying to win over, making sure the experience was positive and easy. I was reclaiming my reputation one interaction at a time. and yet I could feel Matt's frustration growing. His comments became sharper, his attempts to rally others more obvious. It was as if he sensed something was shifting, but couldn't quite pinpoint what. At that Friday, as we were packing up to leave, he stopped by my desk. "You know," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "you're making this harder than it needs to be. You could just agree to help me, and all this would go away." I looked at him, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I said, "I'm sure it will go away soon enough." He frowned, but I could tell he was trying to figure out whether that was a threat or a reassurance. It was neither. It was a promise. The meeting was coming, and with it, the moment Matt would expose himself without me lifting a finger. And I would be ready. The weekend before the team values meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Matt had looked at me on Friday, that half smile hiding irritation like a poker player watching his winning hand slip away. I'd seen that look before in other people, and I knew what it meant he was going to double down. By Monday morning, the air in the office was heavier. Not in an obvious way, no shouting matches or dramatic confrontations, but in the undercurrent of conversations, the way people glanced over when Matt entered a room. He was working faster now, talking more loudly, finding excuses to corner colleagues in the hallway. At 10 a.m., I caught snippets of him speaking to Sarah, one of the newer hires, about people who refused to be team players. His voice was low, but the tone was unmistakably pointed. When she asked who he meant, he only smiled and said, "You'll figure it out." I didn't interrupt. I didn't even let on that I'd heard. Instead, I went back to my desk and pulled up the file I'd been building for weeks, screenshots, transcripts, detailed notes. Every comment, every passive-aggressive email, every time he tried to frame me as selfish or uncooperative. This wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about preparation. Later that afternoon, an email from our department head landed in everyone's inbox, a reminder for the Thursday meeting with an added note that each team member should be ready to share examples of collaboration they were proud of and areas where they felt the team could improve. I almost laughed. It was a perfect setup. Matt would see this as his chance to call me out under the guise of constructive feedback, but in doing so, he'd be doing exactly what I needed, handing me the opening to dismantle his entire narrative in front of the people who mattered. Tuesday, I decided to test something. During our morning coffee break, I made sure to stand near Matt in the break room, sipping slowly while chatting with a couple of other colleagues about how excited I was for the meeting. "I've been keeping track of all the little ways we've helped each other this quarter," I said. "I think it's important to celebrate that." Matt's expression was unreadable, but I could see his jaw tighten just slightly. He was used to steering the narrative. Me actively framing it was throwing him off balance. By Wednesday, the tension had become almost tangible. Matt's friendly mask was slipping in small, telling ways. When I offered to help him with a data report, he declined too quickly, saying, "Don't worry, I can handle it. Some of us actually like pitching in." It was loud enough for 2 other people to hear. I didn't rise to it. I just nodded and walked away. The more I refused to take the bait, the more unhinged he started to seem. And I knew that, on Thursday, in a room full of colleagues and leadership, that crack in his composure could become a fracture. Thursday came. The conference room was bright with floor-to-ceiling windows letting in harsh winter sunlight. Our department head, Maria, sat at the head of the table, flipping through a stack of notes. The rest of us settled in, some with coffee, others with notepads. Matt sat 3 seats down from me, his posture perfect, his smile polite. Maria opened the meeting by talking about our recent successes, then asked us each to share moments of collaboration we were proud of. Around the table, people spoke about small victories, stepping in for a sick teammate, helping troubleshoot a stubborn technical issue, organizing after-hours events. When it was my turn, I kept my tone calm but deliberate. This quarter, I've been grateful for the times we've all had each other's backs. Even small things, covering calls, sharing contacts, staying late to meet deadlines. I've been documenting a lot of these moments, and I think they really show who's willing to go the extra mile for the team. I saw Matt's eyes narrow just a fraction. Then it was his turn. He leaned forward, hands folded, and with a small laugh said, "I think our biggest area for improvement is around mutual support. There's a difference between working together and working side by side, and sometimes, well, let's just say, not everyone is willing to step up when it matters." Maria tilted her head. "Can you give a specific example, Matt?" He hesitated, not because he didn't have one, but because naming me directly would make him look petty. He chose the middle ground. Let's just say there was an opportunity recently for someone to contribute to a major personal event for a colleague, and they declined. That kind of thing affects morale. The room went quiet for half a beat. Maria's brows furrowed. You mean asking someone to host your wedding guests in their home? The fact that she said it out loud, blunt and unembellished, was devastating for him. A couple of people at the table shifted uncomfortably. Others looked outright shocked. Well, when you put it that way. He began, his easy smile faltering. I leaned in slightly, voice calm. I think it's important to respect people's boundaries, especially when it comes to their personal space and property. Being part of a team doesn't mean crossing those lines. Maria nodded slowly. I agree. Let's keep the focus on work-related collaboration. Matt didn't speak again for the rest of the meeting. Afterward, as we filtered out, I overheard two colleagues whispering near the door. Can you believe he actually asked that? No wonder Ryan said no. I'd have done the same. The shift was palpable. The story had changed. It wasn't about me being unhelpful anymore. It was about Matt overstepping, and he'd handed me the win without me ever having to attack him directly. Back at my desk, I pulled up the folder of evidence one last time. I didn't need to use it now, but it was there, a reminder of how close he'd come to damaging my reputation and how close I'd come to losing my temper. Instead, I let him talk himself into a corner, and watching him squirm his way out of it was more satisfying than any outburst could have been. After the Thursday meeting, the atmosphere shifted in ways that were both subtle and unmistakable. It wasn't a cinematic moment where everyone high-fived me in the hallway and declared, I was right all along, office politics never works that cleanly. But I could feel the change in tone when people spoke to me. It was in the extra seconds of eye contact, the small smiles, the way a couple of coworkers stopped by my desk later that day to check in on how I was doing. Matt, on the other hand, walked out of that meeting with his charm dulled. He still said his hellos, but the easy confidence had a hairline crack running through it. He'd miscalculated, thinking the wedding guest request could be spun into a selfless act on his part, painting me as selfish. Instead, Maria had called it out for exactly what it was, a blatant overstep. The next morning, he didn't greet me at all. Just walked past my desk with a tight jaw, clutching a folder so hard I thought the paper inside might crumple. That was when I knew he wasn't done. People like Matt didn't just lick their wounds and move on. They tried to find another way to win. Sure enough, by Monday, whispers had started again. Not about the wedding, but about communication issues and missed deadlines. The first time I heard it, I almost laughed. It was such a transparent pivot. But I also knew how dangerous these quiet, persistent rumors could be if left unchecked. So I adjusted my strategy. I started sending concise, well-timed follow-up emails after every meeting, summarizing decisions and action points, copying not just Matt, but anyone involved. It wasn't overkill. It was documentation, a breadcrumb trail showing I was on top of my work. When Matt tried to imply to a teammate that I'd been late in delivering a report, she had the email showing I'd submitted it 2 days early. His version of events kept running into my paper trail like a bird flying into glass. The cracks in his credibility began to widen. One afternoon, Maria called a quick stand-up to discuss progress on a client pitch. Matt jumped in, suggesting that someone had dropped the ball on the visuals. I didn't have to say a word. Our graphic designer, who'd been CC'd on all my updates, piped up. Actually, Ryan's part was finished and sent to me on Monday. The delay was on my end, not his. There was a moment of silence. Matt's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He forced a chuckle and muttered, "Oh, good to know," before retreating into his chair. Outside of work, I kept my head down. I didn't want to give him anything to latch onto, but privately, I was compiling a quiet ledger in my mind every time he tried to undermine me, every time the truth contradicted him. And I realized something: the more he failed, the more reckless he became. By late February, his frustration was starting to spill over. During a Friday afternoon meeting, he interrupted me mid-sentence to clarify something I hadn't even finished explaining. His tone was sharp, almost condescending. I let him finish, then calmly pulled up the relevant document on the shared screen. "I think what you're referring to is actually covered here," I said, highlighting the section. "It's already been addressed." A couple of people looked down at their notes, trying to hide smirks. Matt leaned back in his chair, silent for the rest of the call. The following week, Maria approached me privately. "I'm not sure what's going on between you and Matt," she said carefully, "but I've noticed some tension. I want you to know I've been paying attention. Your work speaks for itself." That was as close to a clear signal as I was going to get that leadership was seeing through him. It was tempting to lay it all out. Right then the wedding requests, the rumors, the passive-aggressive digs, but I didn't. Not yet. Timing mattered. Instead, I simply said, I appreciate you saying that. I care about the team, and I just want to do my job well. Over the next month, I focused on keeping my work spotless and my tone professional even when Matt's wasn't. Every interaction was calculated. I'd give him nothing to twist, nothing to weaponize. It worked. Slowly, the conversations that used to orbit around his opinions began to bypass him. People came directly to me for answers. In group discussions, his interruptions were met with polite but firm redirections from others, not just me. And then came the slip-up I'd been waiting for. In a rush to finalize a client proposal, Matt sent out a draft riddled with errors, figures from last quarter, outdated branding, even a misspelled client name. It was sent not just internally, but to the client. The fallout was immediate. Maria was furious. Matt tried to pin the blame on miscommunication from the design team, but the email trail showed it had been entirely his work. When Maria confronted him in front of the team, his voice faltered for the first time since I'd known him. "It won't happen again," he muttered, but the damage was done. That Friday, as I left the office, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked the same as I had months ago, same jacket, same tired eyes, but inside I felt steadier. Matt wasn't gone yet. People like him didn't disappear without one last swing, but I'd shifted the balance. The next move would be his, and whatever it was, I'd be ready. And the truth was, he'd already lost something far more important than any single confrontation, the belief that everyone would take his word over mine. Matt's last swing came sooner than I expected. It was the first Monday of April. The office still had that sluggish post-weekend quiet when I walked in, but there was a hum in the air, not the usual Monday groans, but the electric murmur of people who knew something juicy and couldn't quite hide it. By the time I reached my desk, I saw it. An email from HR marked confidential asking me to come in for a discussion at 2:00 p.m. Now I'd been careful for months. Every message saved, every deliverable time-stamped. The only way something like this landed in my inbox was if someone had gone out of their way to manufacture a problem. I didn't have to guess who. At 2:00 sharp, I stepped into the HR manager's office. Maria was already there, sitting stiffly in a corner chair. Matt was beside her, leaning back just enough to look relaxed, his expression a blend of concern and disappointment, the kind of look you'd expect from a teacher about to scold a promising student. The HR manager, Denise, gestured for me to sit. "Ryan, we've had a report of inappropriate conduct on your part toward a coworker," she began. Matt didn't look at me. It's not something I wanted to escalate, but when team morale is affected, I can't just stay silent. I kept my voice even. "And which coworker is this?" There was a pause. Denise glanced at Matt, who finally met my eyes. "You know who," he said, but I didn't, and that was the point. His claim was vague enough to hang in the air, but loaded enough to plant suspicion. I leaned forward slightly. I'd like to hear the details of the allegation so I can respond appropriately. Denise opened a folder. "The complaint suggests you've made dismissive remarks toward colleagues during meetings and excluded certain team members from relevant email threads." I almost laughed. This was his masterstroke, taking the meticulous documentation I'd built to protect myself and reframing it as evidence I was intentionally leaving people out. "Do you have specific instances?" I asked. Matt spoke up quickly. "It's not about a specific day, it's a pattern. People have felt left out, and which people I cut in still calm, but sharper now. Because every deliverable I've worked on in the last 4 months has included the full relevant distribution list. I can produce records of that right now." Denise looked uncomfortable. "Ryan, perhaps you can send me that documentation after this meeting. I can pull it up right now," I said, taking out my laptop. "In fact, if you want, we can compare my records to the times Matt has claimed I missed someone. I think you'll find a few discrepancies." Matt shifted in his chair. "This isn't about nitpicking emails. It's exactly about that," I said evenly. "If the accusation is that I'm excluding people." Maria, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "I think we should review those records before making any judgments." That was my green light. Within an hour, I'd sent Denise a neatly organized folder of email threads, meeting summaries, and CC lists. Every file was dated, time-stamped, and easy to navigate. The next morning, she called me back in. "Ryan, thank you for sending this. I've reviewed it, and I don't see evidence of exclusion." Her tone softened. "If anything, it shows you've gone above and beyond to communicate thoroughly." She didn't say it outright, but I could read between the lines the complaint had backfired. Still, I knew this wouldn't stop Matt entirely. People like him didn't walk away after a single failed strike, but what I didn't know was that his next move wouldn't just be a swing at me, it would be the swing that took him out of the game entirely. The trigger was a high-profile client project. We'd been working for weeks to prepare a major pitch. Maria had divided responsibilities carefully. I handled the core proposal. Matt was in charge of the supplementary data and market analysis. 2 days before the presentation, Maria asked for a joint rehearsal to iron out any rough edges. I sent her my section in advance. Matt didn't. When the rehearsal started, he was fumbling through slides, half of which had placeholder text still in them. The client's name was misspelled again. And when Maria asked where the updated market figures were, Matt claimed he hadn't received them from Ryan. My laptop was already open. "You mean these?" I asked, projecting the file to the conference room screen. "I sent them to you last Wednesday at 9:42 a.m. Here's the email." Silence. Maria's eyes moved from the slide to Matt. "We're 2 days out and your section isn't ready. I've been juggling other priorities." "Not anymore," she cut in. Ryan finished the section. Matt stepped back from the pitch prep. That was the first time I saw genuine panic flash across his face. Losing control of a major project meant losing influence, and in our office, influence was everything. By the time we delivered the pitch polished, precise, and well-received, the shift was obvious. People deferred to me in meetings without glancing at him for approval. Conversations that once included him out of habit now carried on without his input. I wasn't naive. This wasn't a movie where the villain gets marched out in handcuffs while the hero is applauded. Matt still had allies and office politics still had teeth, but I had something stronger now, proof of his incompetence and a track record that was bulletproof. The final blow came from somewhere I didn't expect. A week after the pitch, Maria announced that she was restructuring the team to better align with project demands. Matt was reassigned to a less visible role, still a manager, but without the high-profile accounts that kept him in the spotlight. He didn't take it gracefully. For days he was curt, avoiding eye contact, muttering under his breath when I passed. But there was nothing left for him to leverage. Every attempted dig just slid off because the one thing he couldn't fabricate was results, and mine were speaking louder than ever. The Friday after the restructuring, I stayed late to finish up a report. As I packed my bag, I caught sight of Matt leaving the building, his posture a little more slumped than usual. For months I'd imagined this moment, the day I'd get to throw his arrogance back in his face, to say something cutting that would sting for weeks. But now that it was here, I didn't feel the need. He'd done the damage to himself. All I'd done was refuse to play the part he'd written for me. And maybe that was the quietest, sharpest revenge of all. It didn't take long for Matt to start sniffing around for a new target. After the restructuring, he kept his head down for a while, a little too quiet, the kind of quiet that made me suspicious. It wasn't in his nature to just fade into the background. He needed someone to push against someone he could undermine to feel relevant again. That someone turned out to be Sam. Sam was one of the newer hires, a data analyst fresh out of grad school. He was brilliant in his field, but inexperienced in office politics. Friendly to a fault, eager to please, the perfect kind of person for Matt to manipulate. It started small. I overheard Matt telling Sam in the break room, "Just a tip, don't send Maria your raw data yet. She prefers it filtered through someone with more client experience." "I can help with that." Translation: "Let me take your work, slap my name on it, and claim the credit." Sam, too, green to know better, nodded along. Over the next week, I saw it happening in real time. Sam's updates and meetings became Matt and I worked on, or Matt suggested. And while Sam's original work was sharp, the versions that reached Maria's desk had Matt's fingerprints all over them, mostly in the form of bloated, unnecessary commentary that made them harder to read. It wasn't my business. That's what I told myself. Matt had already burned me once, and I'd won my ground back. Why should I step in? But then Friday rolled around. We were wrapping up for the week when Maria called an impromptu meeting to discuss a new project. The client wanted a data-heavy approach, and Maria, knowing Sam's skills, turned to him. "Sam, can you walk us through your initial findings?" Sam froze. Matt's been coordinating that," so Maria's expression tightened. "Matt isn't on this project's core team." There was an awkward silence. I could almost hear the click of Matt's trap snapping shut. Sam had nothing to present because Matt had been sitting on his work, controlling the flow of information. That was my breaking point. After the meeting, I caught up with Sam in the hallway. Listen, I said quietly, you need to send your work directly to Maria from now on. CC me if you're worried about protocol, but don't let anyone filter it for you. He looked uneasy. Matt said that's just how things are done here. I shook my head. That's how Matt does things. And you've seen how well that's worked out for him lately. Sam hesitated, then gave a small nod. I thought that would be the end of it, but Matt didn't take the shift lightly. By Monday, he'd realized his influence over Sam was slipping, and he came straight for me. We were in the break room when he cornered me. You've been meddling, he said in a low voice. Protecting a teammate from being set up isn't meddling, I replied, his jaw tightened. You think you're untouchable now just because Maria likes you. You're not. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to match his. You're right, I'm not untouchable, but I don't need to be. I just need to be right. We stared at each other for a beat. Then he smirked. We'll see how long that lasts. The following week, Maria scheduled another team values check-in. I didn't know if it was coincidence or if she'd picked up on the tension, but either way, I was ready. When the discussion turned to ensuring credit is fairly distributed, Matt jumped in. Sometimes newer team members need guidance on how to present their work, and that means collaborating with more experienced staff before sending things to leadership. It was a clever move, vague enough to sound reasonable, but pointed enough that everyone knew who he meant. I let him finish, then said, collaboration is great, but transparency is better. If someone's work is being held up or altered without their knowledge, that's not guidance, that's interference. A murmur rippled through the room. Maria's eyes flicked between us but didn't intervene. Matt gave a tight laugh. No one's altering anything. You're reading too much into. Then you won't mind if Sam shares the original version of the dataset from last week, I said, turning to Sam. The one before any edits. Sam looked startled but pulled up the file. The difference was obvious, clean, concise data in his version, weighed down with irrelevant commentary in the edited one. Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. Let's make sure all original work is sent directly to me going forward. Clear, clear. After that, Matt's reach shrank even further. He stopped trying to openly control projects and instead retreated to his corner, keeping his head down. But his pride was bruised, and I could tell he was still looking for an angle. For the first time, though, I wasn't worried. I had learned how to read him, how to stay 2 steps ahead without becoming what he was. And more importantly, I'd realized something revenge didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes the quiet act of stopping someone from hurting anyone else was enough, at least for now. For weeks after the dataset showdown, Matt kept a low profile. On the surface, it looked like he'd learned his lesson, but if you knew him, if you really understood how deep his resentment ran, you knew it was only a matter of time before he tried something else. And sure enough, he found his opening in the form of the quarterly client review. The review was a big deal. It was when Maria and the leadership team met with our top clients to present updates, results, and plans for the next quarter. If you impressed during the review, you didn't just get recognition, you got influence. And Matt craved influence like a drowning man craved air. The twist Maria had assigned me to lead the main presentation for one of our biggest clients, Riverside Analytics. It was the kind of assignment that could set me up for a raise, maybe even a promotion. I should have anticipated what happened next. One Monday morning, a week before the review, I opened my inbox to find a flood of urgent emails from Riverside. Confusion over data, concerns about delivery timelines, and questions about process. Except, none of those concerns made sense. We'd been ahead of schedule, and their last check-in had been positive. When I called our client contact to clarify, she sounded puzzled. We were told there'd been delays, she said. Matt reached out to explain, and he promised to send over an adjusted timeline. There it was. Matt had gone behind my back, feeding the client a false narrative, and he'd done it in a way that made me look like I was scrambling to fix my own mistakes. I could have gone straight to Maria. I could have forwarded the emails and let her connect the dots. But something in me wanted more than just clearing my name. I wanted him to get caught in the act. So, I set a trap. I reached out to the client again, thanking them for their patience and explaining that we were in fact on schedule. Then I casually mentioned that Matt was helping coordinate the transition files, a phrase vague enough to make him think his little deception was working. Meanwhile, I asked Sam to monitor our shared project logs for any unusual edits or uploads. Sure enough, 2 days later, Sam flagged a set of revised reports Matt had quietly uploaded, reports riddled with unnecessary changes that painted the project as lagging. The next step was to make sure Maria saw them, but not from me. The opportunity came in our Thursday prep meeting. Maria asked for a final rundown of all client projects, and Matt, looking smug, jumped in. Riverside's been a challenge, he said, adopting his best concerned colleague tone. Ryan's been doing his best, but the data flow has been complicated. I stepped in to help reframe the timeline so expectations are realistic. Maria's brow furrowed. Complicated how I let him talk. He spun a careful web delays due to miscommunication, conflicting priorities, my supposed overcommitment to side tasks. It was almost impressive the way he could twist half-truths into something that sounded plausible. When he finished, I kept my voice calm. Maria, would you like to see the original reports? Sam, could you pull them up? Sam, bless him, didn't hesitate. He opened the clean, on-schedule reports on the screen. These were submitted 2 weeks ago, I said. No delays, no complications, all verified by the client until recently. Maria glanced between the reports and Matt. And the revised version, Sam pulled those up next, the ones Matt had altered. The contrast was stark. I didn't accuse him directly. I didn't need to. Maria's voice was even, but her eyes were sharp. Matt, can you explain why these changes were made without my knowledge? For the first time since I'd known him, Matt stumbled. I was just trying to clarify. Maria cut him off. From now on, you're not to contact Riverside directly unless instructed. Ryan will handle all communication. The look on his face was a mix of rage and humiliation. Later that day, I found him in the break room, staring at the coffee machine, like it had personally wronged him. You think you've won? He said without looking at me. I shrugged. I think the truth won. That's enough for me. He turned, then his eyes cold. One day you'll slip, and I'll be there when you do. I didn't respond. I'd learned by now that arguing with him only fed his ego. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't bluffing. The client review went off without a hitch. In fact, Riverside was so impressed with the clarity of our reporting that they asked me to consult on an additional project. Maria was thrilled. My stock in the company had never been higher. But Matt, he was cornered now, and a cornered man I knew was dangerous, which is why when I saw him lingering by my desk the following week, hands in his pockets and a faint smile on his lips, I knew something was coming. What I didn't know was just how public and irreversible it would be. Matt's words from that day echoed in my head for the rest of the week. One day you'll slip, and I'll be there when you do. They weren't just a warning, they were a promise. I kept my head down, doing my job, keeping communication tight with clients, documenting everything in case he tried to twist the truth again. But the thing about Matt was that he never attacked head on. He waited for moments where the ground under you was already unstable, then gave it the smallest, most calculated push. The next crack in the ground came with the quarterly leadership sync. It was a high-pressure meeting where department heads presented key wins and challenges to the executives. Maria had asked me to prepare a 5-minute highlight on Riverside and our other major accounts. I worked on my slides until they were razor-sharp, no fluff, just results. I knew Maria valued precision, and if I could deliver this without a hitch, it would cement the trust I'd been building with her for months. The morning of the meeting, I came in early to double-check everything. The presentation file was exactly where I'd left it on our shared drive. I opened it, scanned each slide, and left my laptop running in sleep mode so I could grab a coffee before we started. When I came back, my laptop was still there, but something in the air felt off. Maybe it was the faint shift in how the screensaver seemed to fade away, or the way my desk chair was angled slightly differently. It was small enough that I might have brushed it off if I didn't know Matt. We filed into the conference room. Maria sat at the head of the table, executives on either side, and I was halfway down, laptop hooked up to the projector. I started my presentation. The first 2 slides went smoothly, clear metrics, positive trends. I felt the room leaning in, interested. Then I clicked to the 3rd slide and froze. It was wrong, completely wrong. The graphs were inverted, actual performance numbers replaced with false data that made it look like Riverside's satisfaction scores had plummeted. Delivery timelines were skewed. The formatting was sloppy, amateurish, like someone had thrown it together in minutes. The executives shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat. Maria's eyebrows drew together in a sharp frown. I knew exactly what had happened. Matt had gotten to my presentation. I could have panicked. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. But panic was exactly what he wanted. A flustered Ryan stumbling through bad data, looking incompetent in front of the highest ranks in the company. Instead, I took a slow breath. This, I said, clicking my laser pointer toward the distorted chart, is what happens when someone outside the project team tampers with verified client data. A ripple of surprise went through the room. I clicked again, pulling up the version history of the file. There it was in black and white, the most recent edit timestamped just an hour ago, made by Matt H. The silence that followed was electric. Maria's eyes turned to Matt, who was sitting 2 seats away, feigning confusion. I was just trying to help clean up the formatting, he stammered. I kept my voice calm. The formatting changes also happen to replace accurate data with numbers that don't exist. And given the meeting we're in right now, that's not just a formatting issue. That's sabotage. You could feel the air tighten in the room. Maria didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Matt, she said, her tone like a blade. You and I will have a private discussion after this meeting. For now, Ryan, please restore the correct data. I switched back to the clean version from the backup I'd kept on a flash drive, a habit born from surviving Matt's games. The real metrics glowed on the screen, and just like that, the tension in the room eased. By the end of the presentation, the executives were nodding again, jotting down notes. The contrast between the botched fake slide and the polished real ones only made the truth stand out more. When the meeting adjourned, Matt all but bolted, but Maria caught him before he reached the door. She didn't yell. She simply said, "Office, now." I didn't see the conversation that followed, but I saw the outcome. By the next morning, Matt's desk was cleared out. An internal memo went out announcing his departure from the company. No further details, no goodbyes. It should have felt like victory. In some ways, it did. Months of his manipulation, backstabbing, and calculated sabotage were finally over. But I also felt a strange hollowness. Matt had spent so long trying to undermine me that in a way he'd defined my days. Removing him left a quiet space I wasn't used to. That evening, as I left the office, I found Maria waiting by the elevators. "You handled yourself well today," she said. "Most people would have lost their cool." I shrugged. "I've had practice." She smiled faintly. "Let's make sure you get recognized for it." The elevator doors opened, and for the first time in a long while, I stepped in feeling lighter. But as the doors closed, I couldn't help but think about Matt's last words to me in the break room, about being there when I slipped. Because even though he was gone from the office, something told me I hadn't heard the last of him. For a week after Matt was gone, the office felt different. Lighter. No more passive-aggressive comments in the break room. No more mysterious mistakes that only seemed to benefit him. People who used to keep their heads down around me were suddenly stopping by my desk, offering congratulations in their own careful ways. One guy even said, "Glad you stood up to him." That took guts. But I knew better than to think it was over. Matt wasn't the type to disappear quietly. The first sign came on a Thursday night. I was leaving the grocery store when I noticed a car idling a few rows away from mine. The streetlight cast a shadow across the windshield, but I could make out the outline of someone sitting perfectly still watching. When I drove out of the lot, the car pulled out too, hanging back just far enough to look casual, but not far enough to be a coincidence. I took a longer route home, circling a few extra blocks, and sure enough, the car kept pace. It wasn't until I made a sharp last-minute turn into a gas station that it sped past me. I caught a glimpse of the driver, Matt. I didn't tell anyone at work, not even Maria. Without proof, it would sound paranoid. But the next week it happened again. Different location, same feeling. Then came the emails, anonymous at first from burner accounts. Short-cutting lines like, "You think this is over, people will see who you really are. You took something from me, I'll take it back." Each one landed like a stone in my stomach. I changed my password, set up 2-factor authentication, even ran security checks on my laptop. But the thing about fear is once it gets inside you, it grows. 2. Fridays later, I woke up to find someone had spray painted a single word across the hood of my car, "liar." It was the kind of accusation that makes you doubt yourself even when you know it's not true. Neighbors passed by pretending not to look, but I could feel their curiosity prickling in the air. I had the car towed for a repaint. The shop guy asked if I knew who might have done it. I said no, because saying my fired colleague who's been stalking me felt like handing Matt exactly the drama he wanted. But the line between work and home was crumbling. The next Monday, a client forwarded Maria an email from me, except I hadn't written it. It was full of unprofessional language, even a veiled insult toward the client's team. I knew instantly what it was. Matt was forging my emails. Fortunately, I'd set up a system to authenticate all official correspondence so Maria could prove it hadn't come from my account, but it still shook me. He was moving from petty intimidation to calculated attacks that could cost me my job. That night, I made a choice. I stopped thinking of myself as Matt's victim. If he wanted a war, I would give him one, but on my terms. I started documenting everything. Every suspicious car sighting, every anonymous email, every unusual interaction online. I set up a motion-activated camera facing the street where I parked, and another one inside my apartment. If Matt wanted to keep playing, I'd collect every move he made until I had enough to end this for good. The next time I spotted him tailing me, I didn't drive in circles or duck away. I drove straight to the police station. He kept driving when I pulled into the lot, but I'd already caught him on the dash cam. I filed a formal stalking report. The officer said it would help to have more concrete evidence, but at least now, there was a paper trail. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was shifting from defense to offense. Still, I knew Matt wasn't going to stop just because the police were aware. If anything, he might get bolder and more reckless, and I was ready for it. 2 weeks after I filed the stalking report, my phone buzzed with a message that made my pulse spike. "You think you can hide, I know where you'll be tonight." No name, no number, but I didn't need either. Matt's tone was unmistakable. Instead of deleting it, I took a screenshot and forwarded it to the officer handling my case. His reply was simple. "If you know where he'll show, let us know." That night, our department had a rooftop mixer. I hadn't planned on going, but now it was the perfect trap. I arrived early, picked a table near the edge, and started recording on my phone. It took only 20 minutes for the hair on the back of my neck to stand up. Matt was here, hoodie cap pulled low, eyes scanning until they locked on me. I didn't look away. I stood, walked toward him, and said evenly, "You shouldn't be here." He smirked. "Public place, Ryan. I can be wherever I want. Not when there's a police report telling you to stay away," I said, loud enough for others to hear. His face tightened, and then he blurted, "You ruined my career. You think I'm letting that go?" Every word was caught on video. I stepped outside, called the officer, and within minutes 2 uniformed cops walked in. They didn't drag him out. They simply took him by the arm and escorted him away while the room tried not to stare. That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. Over the next few weeks, I handed over everything, the texts, camera footage, dash cam clips, and that recording from the bar. The case built itself. Soon after, the court granted me a restraining order and filed harassment charges. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Work slowly returned to normal. Maria stopped me one afternoon and said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't let him drive you out." That hit me harder than I expected. The real win wasn't in seeing Matt in court. It was in the fact that I was still here, still trusted, still standing. Months later, locking my apartment door, I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't look harder exactly, just steadier. I thought about the first time I caught him tailing me, how fear gripped me then. And I thought about the night I faced him at the bar, phone in hand, ready for him to hang himself with his own words. Somewhere along the way, control had shifted. It wasn't his game anymore. It was mine. If you've been in this position with someone who won't let go of their grudge, remember this. The quiet work of documenting, of standing your ground, is power. People like Matt rely on fear to keep you silent, but silence doesn't mean defeat. And when the moment comes, speaking with proof is the loudest thing you can do. If you've ever faced someone who pushed you to the edge, tell me in the comments what you did. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Next time, it might be the ultimate sweet revenge.